The other thing is the more mineral dense your grass gets, and when you're grazing, this would be a little bit more harder to quantify than if you were, feeding a TMR and you weighing everything in and out. But as that grass increases in its mineral density, a couple things will happen is its moisture will be closer to 75 to 85% standing instead of 80, 85 to 90% water standing. So what happens is the cow's getting a greater mineral density, so she's going to eat less. So even if it's the same amount of grass, less becomes more, if that makes sense.
This podcast is brought to you by GroundShift. If you're anything like me, you've probably realised that doing things the way they've always been done doesn't always lead to better outcomes on farm. And that's where GroundShift comes in. GroundShift is all about helping farmers rethink the way that they approach their soils, the inputs into their system, and improving their overall farm system performance. We focus on building resilience, improving efficiency, and ultimately creating more profitable farm systems. It's not always about throwing more into your system. Sometimes it's about understanding what's driving those results beneath the surface. So if you're serious about improving your farm's profitability and resilience, and utilising biology to drive your farm system performance, I highly recommend checking out groundshift.ag, and you can follow them online at groundshift.ag on Instagram. Welcome to another episode of the From the Soil Up podcast. Today's special guest is Lynn Hoover from Ocean Blue Agronomics in Oklahoma. How are you today, Lynn?
I'm doing good. How you doing, Conan?
I'm doing really well, thank you. I'm stoked to have you on today because I've actually been diving quite a bit into the ocean and sea minerals as an area of interest for the last couple of months, and since coming across C90. So I'm looking forward to having a really good chat with you today and answering some of those questions that I've got basically after reading that book and also talking to you guys as well. So Lynn, let's keep it simple. What are ocean minerals and why should a farmer really care about them as part of their farm system?
So ocean minerals, what makes them unique is they carry a vast array of, the trace elements and the ultra trace elements. And, basically every living thing needs minerals for health. And it just so happens that the ocean minerals are exactly what soil life is looking for, grasses, ruminant livestock, even ourselves. And so whenever you incorporate it into, our ecosystems, if you will, back onto the land, it just really produces, good healthy grass, livestock, milk, and et cetera. It depends, whatever you're growing.
I guess how do ocean minerals, how do they differ from, I guess, some of the other forms of fertilizers or nutrient sources that we use in farming?
So I guess the first thing it's important to understand that I didn't realize this for a long time in my life is that ocean water is not just salty. It is actually full of a 90 element spectrum. There is salt in there, and but anyway, it's full of minerals. It's full of life. It is in the ocean water itself is in that perfect matrix supposedly for what grass is looking for, ruminants and soil biology. And the other thing is it's very bioavailable, and so our rock minerals are important as well that are on land and fertilizers. However, the natural, I guess the naturalness of, that's a word. The ocean minerals, being natural, what all that's looking for allows for a healthier plant, healthier animal, healthier ecosystem. And basically we're trying to harmonize with nature's process of the natural nitrogen cycle out of the air as well as below our feet. Same with the phosphorus and the mycorrhiza. Our potassium salts have the ability to, can transmutate to a point to create potassiums if needed, and, different things like that. And so we're leaning less on, those commercial fertilizers, if you will. Not that they're bad in of themselves, but it's the misuse or excessive use that can cause challenges. And so we're just trying to, approach this from a holistic view, a health view, profitable for, all those involved, and also, just, good for the ecosystem and nature itself.
Yeah, it's awesome. So essentially the ocean minerals kind of seem to unlock a lot of that biological function in the soil, that natural function that we're looking for.
Correct. It unlocks that biological function as well as genetic expression. That's correct.
Ah, that's awesome. So for those that aren't familiar with your work, Lynn, can you please introduce yourself and give a bit about your background?
Yeah. So, and I forgot to thank you for the opportunity to be on here with you today. But yeah, so I grew up in Pennsylvania, which is on the east coast of the United States, on a dairy farm. And it's, since I guess we immigrated to this country, I mean, my parents, both sets of grandparents, as far back as we know, we were dairy farmers. And just, worked with dad as a very young boy in the family there, feeding cows, growing crops, took a great interest in it. And when I got out of school, I dove into agronomy headlong and everything it takes to feed cows and, all this stuff that makes it work. And to be fair, I can't remember honestly how I came across Ocean Minerals other than the fact that I stumbled across probably through Acres USA is probably where I really found it at. Anyhow, so I read the book Fertility from the Ocean Deep, and that opened my mind and eyes agronomically to a whole nother level of, correct farming. And when we started bringing that to our land and to our dairy herd, I mean, we saw a whole nother level of great efficiencies and production, and just it got really, really exciting. And so that's been for me now well over 20 some years ago. And so I've been doing this, ever since that. So yeah, so that's been fun and exciting. And so the last 10 years, I've been working full time now across, the United States and I guess parts even around the world, via podcast, just educating and talking to growers and different producers, trying to help them to understand, some of the things we've seen to, help their operations be more profitable and just hopefully take this whole thing to the next level.
Yeah, no, you're very well versed in this area. That's why I was really keen to have you on. I'm always excited to learn from people and kind of ask those questions. I've read one or two of the books on ocean minerals as well, so it's just kind of continuing to be an area that I see that could have massive value, not just for dairy farmers here, but some of our other livestock farmers as well. So is there something that you were seeing, I guess, back in when you first found the books in terms of the farm systems that you were working with in your own farm system that kind of led you more to think this way?
So the biggest thing was on the dairy. So I was always in charge of growing all the crops and managing the fertility, and then working with our nutritionist all the way to the TMR to the feed bunk. And then my brother was the herdsman. He took it from there on the dairy herd. And so, at any rate, one thing is, the cows were just, they were trying to, eat dirt and just unnatural behavior, right? So I knew they were lacking something. And the other thing is, we were a freestall barn. We actually had confinement there. But anyhow, they, we had plenty of trouble with, high enough somatic cell, how it sometimes is on a dairy. And so anyhow, so I started just finally reading, this from reading that book and some others from Acres USA. I came across the understanding that the value of the sea mineral salts, of keeping your potassiums in check. Potassium is important, but we want to keep it in check. And the more calcium within reason that we can mobilize, the healthier the plant, the healthier the animal, and the greater the feed efficiency and the greater the milk production. And so that's kind of, when I started, putting all that together, that started getting really exciting because, we were growing better crops that were more drought tolerant, that were more nutrient dense, which took less total dry matter pounds to get the same amount of milk production, which in turn, we were, like I say, confinement. So you had a lagoon, which in turn, lowered the amount of lagoon, slurry that you had to go, remove. And so, that's a pretty big loop. But I mean, when you pay attention to it all, all them little details do add up at the end of the day. So. Yeah,
I totally agree. So what are the kind of the key soil principles that you now operate by?
So I really like to first look at your percent base saturation. There's a little wiggle room here, but the general parameters are roughly a 65 to 75% base calcium saturation. Like to see magnesium in that, 10 to 12 all the way up to 18-ish, depends on your CEC. Potassium anywhere from 2 to 5% is fine. And then I like to really see our sodium at least 1 to 3%. And if you're in the world of cattle and you're grass-based, I'm not afraid to see sodium go, definitely up into the 3%. 5 doesn't even scare me if we're balancing organic matters and calciums correctly. Because what I've come to learn is that makes your grass even more mineral dense and makes your cows even happier and healthier typically.
That's quite interesting because I think people would think more salt in a system is going to make things, saltier, thinking of seawater.
Right.
So you see that has quite a good flow-on effect to the quality of the grass, but also helping the calcium in the system too.
Yes. So the two key things to remember is that, if you're going to have a more aggressive levels of salt in the soil, we do have to have carbon/organic matter to buffer that, as well as calcium. Those are the key components.
Yeah. So you really need to focus on driving your carbon and your organic matters in your soil at the same time instead of just chucking on a whole heap of salt.
Right. And a lot of people don't understand. It's also important to understand that not all salt is fully created equal, and the fact that a mineral salt, in this case, the ocean mineral salt is beginning life, harmonizing with the life in the soil and it will pull a percentage of carbon out of the air, whereas just regular, pure, white 99% sodium chloride, probably is not going to quite do what C90 is going to do, to be fair.
Yeah, well, that's kind of why I've been diving deep on this subject, and what I've put two and two together is that not all salt is similar. Here in New Zealand, we use some farmers use a bit of fish hydrolysate, so fish fertilizers. Would they achieve similar outcomes in terms of bringing in that ocean mineral salt rather than the ag salt that we traditionally use?
So yeah, you'll get a percentage of salt with especially ocean fish fertilizer, which is good. The fish itself, the hydroxylide is the correct kind of fish to do, and that's going to bring you some oils, which is really good for the soil and life as well, and obviously proteins, which is nitrogen in the soil. But yeah, I mean, fish fertilizer is fantastic. If you have the ability to work with it, it is a fantastic fertility source as well. Absolutely.
That's good to know. We've talked about calcium a little bit as well. How important is that as part of the system alongside, say, sodium and organic matter and carbon?
So probably the threefold cord of soil, as I understand it, would be calcium, carbon, and salt are going to be your biggest three. Phosphorus is going to fit right in there, as kind of a argumentatively third/fourth. But those are the big 3/4 that you have to have for soil to function correctly. If you have them four things, everything else will start self-balancing. If you're missing one of those four, especially the first three on the grand scale, I mean, you're going to be really, limping along compared to what you could be doing.
And that flows through obviously to the plant and then onto your livestock that are working off that as well. Yeah. So have you seen in your experience, if you're focusing on those kind of main three or four and getting them in the right ratios, do you see, say, the trace elements and that all kind of those levels come up as well and be more available?
Yes. So when you focus on managing those four, everything else really self-balances. And so it's kind of the challenge is which came first, chicken or the egg. So calcium sinks in the soil. So there's ways to naturally keep that in the upper stratas. However, I'm a big proponent of if your calcium is sinking out of your upper strata, which it can be, your carbon pushes up, your phosphates push up, and your salts solubilize and make calcium mobile. That's how that works. But if your calcium is sinking out of your upper strata, that's why a small application of a high quality calcium product, whether it's annually or every other year or something, can be critical. Your phosphates are naturally going to push up and kind of stay there, as will your carbons, provided we're not just, burning through them. And then your phosphates, your salt, is that can sequester CO2 out of the air, that solubilizes your calcium, which then hooks to your phosphate, which then every nutrient except nitrogen enters in the phosphate form. And that is where you get your mineral density. Also, as you drive hydrogen in the soil, that's how your sugars get into your plants. And so your salt is very critical because that also is an electrolyte, just like nitrogen or protein in the cow's rumen. And so the more salt that you have without being excessive in the soil, the less nitrogen you got to go look for, or protein in the cow's rumen. And because excessive nitrogen or protein is what burns through your carbons, and then you're back to chasing your tail again. And so your available calcium determines your total volume of yield, or your height and your weight of your crop. Your phosphorus, your available phosphate, is what puts your energy or any L's into your forages. And then your salt plays a big role of, part of the hydrogen cycle, the calcium solubilization, hooking up to your phosphorus, and then obviously, sugars, which is carbon. That's, you got liquid, solid, and gas form of that. And that's really the greatest context, and everything else will follow in behind.
No, that's fascinating. That's some absolute gold right there. So we talk about carbon a lot in farming and how we need to improve our soil carbon because it's kind of the backbone of our farm systems. Can you kind of break down a little bit further why it is so linked to our actual production? Is either whether it be in dairy or in livestock or cropping? So
without carbon, basically that is the energy for all life, right? So if you take all the organic matter out of soil, you're left with clay or sand, right? And there's no life there, correct? If you take forage, the cow is really living off of carbon is what she's living. When she's eating, bellies and bellies full of grass or hay, or even if there's grain in there, that's carbon. That's what she's fueling from, right? And so the carbon thing in the soil is not as much of a mystery as everyone tries to make it. So when we deliver calcium, calcium carbonate is really the correct form of calcium to deliver. And you're going to deliver some carbon physically if it's needed. Okay. Now, where the salt comes in at is land calcium is a very dead, immobile nutrient. So the salt is going to mobilize it in the soil, same as it does in the rumen of the cow. That's why a cow takes salt in every day, is to mobilize calcium and other things. Then your next thing is your salt. Your salt and your calcium in your upper strata, along with your soil life, is what has the ability to pull CO2 out of the air. And that is how you build organic matter, in theory, with or without a growing crop. I've seen it happen under both conditions if you get it right. And you can build organic matter and soil carbon with a growing crop. You can build it in the wintertime. You can build it during fallow periods in dry land country. Okay? That's extremely important because as you build that soil carbon holds 4 times its weight in water and nutrients that can immediately be absorbed and given back to the plant. So whether it's raining or not is somewhat immaterial, because even on a heavy dew night, when this is working correctly, that you can go for weeks and weeks without rain and still be feeding a plant plenty of water. And if your soil is alkali, you can go even further between rains when this system is functioning correctly. I mean, I've seen alkali soils go, 4 weeks plus without rain, and grass is still just, chugging right along. And so it's important to understand that side of it too. But I mean, sequestering carbon is based around available calcium in your upper strata, soil that can breathe, and having adequate mineral salts in your upper strata. That is how you sequester carbon.
And for those farmers who aren't familiar with the term upper strata, what do you mean by that?
So I consider the upper strata to be approximately 6 inches, and I'm sure there's, people, say there's an exact different number on that. But usually I'm using, I guess, the English measurement system. The upper 6 inches is, 4 to 6 inches should be really aerobic if things are functioning correctly, which means there should be oxygen in that strata and, very breathing, living, aerobic activity. And so when the calcium is there, that is what is managing your water. That's what's managing your weed suppression. And that's what's making your basically nutrient efficiency, be maximized to get the greatest yield that you're going to be allowed to have in a said growing season.
No, that's fascinating. So what about those soils that already have quite high sodium in them? Should farmers be concerned about adding more, or does it come back to that point around the type of sodium that's going into the system?
So that's a good question. So there is soils, even here in the U.S., especially when you get the further west we go in the country where it gets drier, we'll start getting percent-based saturations of like in the 90s on calcium. And I've seen sodium numbers up in the, 8, 9, 10, 13, 15% going. And so that's a whole new problem. I'm sure you have them over there as well in certain places. So once calcium on a percent-based saturation crosses 80%, we have to, what I call, knock it off the colloid with some salt. That's the best way to knock it off. Because then calcium becomes dominant and it'll hang on to your phosphorus and not release phosphorus. And then if every nutrient enters in the phosphate form, the whole train is stopped on the tracks, okay? Now, if we're high sodium, if we're excessive on salt, then we need to go look for, when we're high salt, our EC is going to be running extremely high typically, which is going to shock the plant to death or give it a heart attack, if you will, okay? Your 2 greatest governors of excessive salts are going to be calcium carbonate, because calcium is going to govern the EC, as well as humate or any carbon source. Humates are probably going to be your highest. I mean, there's all different kinds. I mean, some people say biochars, humates, even down to some molasses, but your humates has probably got your highest, immediate carbon delivery that you can physically do that's probably affordable to govern back your ECs on your high salts.
So EC, what's that for those that aren't familiar with that term?
Okay, yeah. So EC is just your electrical conductivity. So soil actually has electricity flowing through it. And plants live off of that electricity. It's just like we are. That's what, we can move our fingers because of electronic pulses from our brain and stuff. And so the soil and plants are no different. And so the electrical conductivity is managed by your salts and your carbons in your soil. Too little is no growth, and too much is heart attack and still no growth.
Yeah. I'm playing around with the EC meter now and bringing it into my daily visits, my weekly visits to farms. What should I be shooting for on a handheld EC meter when I'm going around?
So, I mean, if you can see in that, above 150 is good. I mean, you definitely want to be under 1,000. Over 1,000, you're starting to run into, new problems.
Yeah.
But at 250-ish range, 300-ish range, I'd say you're humming along at a really nice, that's a nice governed area to be fair. And you're going to see that go up and down with, moisture, could be even, the moon phase could affect it, how big or small the plant is, the time of the year. So, I mean, I tell guys, an EC meter, they're definitely cool to play with, but don't let it make you go bald.
Yeah. Well, I don't have to worry about that. I'm already bald, so that's all good.
You're good.
One thing that's really interesting that I've learnt from you is around how sodium can transmute potassium. And obviously I deal with quite a few dairy farmers here, but also in sheep and beef, kind of our ranchers equivalent, quite often can have high K in some of their soils too. So how does utilising the role of, ocean minerals help to, buffer that high K?
So first off, just to reference that point, that was Bruce Tanio was the one where I learned all that from, to be fair on that. So nature has an ability to substitute all kinds of things for man's ignorance, okay? And it's a good thing the good Lord made it that way, because if it wasn't, we'd have starved and died a long time ago. I learned that. So in nature, for instance, if you look at a periodic table of elements, let's talk calcium and potassium first. They're only one number different. And what that means is plants. A lot of folks have, even agronomists have not figured this out yet, but plants really want calcium. That's what they're searching for. Calcium is very insoluble and it's very unmobile by and large. But if you can ever learn how to move calcium in the soil or in a ration, that totally game changes your total ability to produce. Okay. So being we're not very good at that. Okay. I say that tongue in cheek. Is nature, you can substitute potassium for calcium. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not what the cow wants. It's not what the plant wants, because that's excessive potassium causes almost every metabolic problem on the entire dairy farm. Excessive potassium is why you have vet bill, okay? Excessive potassium is why you're broke buying weed killer, fungicides, and bug killer. Bottom line, okay? It's that big. Now, where the salt comes in at, okay, is your salt can, here again, when potassium is excessive, it'll help to keep it in check, okay? And if potassium is lacking, it can actually what they call transmutate and create needed potassium if it's none there, okay? And then the other thing that salt does is salt is its greatest role is actually, that is the right way by chemistry, and there's also biology, but by chemistry, that is your calcium mover, okay? So the more calcium we can learn to move, the greater the phosphate release, and that's where your sugar bond comes from. And also there's a hydrogen creation that happens in there as well. And so on hydrogen, is very energized. And that also is how you put your sugars and minerals into your plants then. Because your calcium determines your total volume yield, and your available calcium is what gives anything its taste and its shelf life. So the more calcium you can mobilize, the greater the test weight, bale density, bulk density of your milk, your components. That's what's going to give you your shelf life of your, could be your raw milk if you got that, or your fruit, vegetables, hay, whatever you're growing. So the calcium thing is a huge, huge deal. And we have been trained to largely farm in our modern society with lots of nitrogen, lots of potassium. And it's a system that produces results. However, we've kind of cheated ourselves and nature in the fact that it costs us big time. That when you can understand this sea salt thing and how to move calcium and phosphorus that way, it gets way funner. I think it's way more fun to farm because you see greater results with less inputs, with less weed problems, less disease problems, and that goes for the cow, the plant, the animal, the soil, and you got this carbon thing running, so water lasts longer. Drought's still a drought, but a drought's not near as punishing as the other way of farming.
Yeah, no, that's you pretty much summed up why I'm so fascinated by this topic and see such a massive upside for our farmers here in New Zealand. Why do you think, as an industry, we've become so reliant on using synthetic nitrogen and other fertilizers, and rather than kind of exploring what the roles of salt and all this as well?
So my understanding of all the reading I've done, and to be fair, I'll let this kind of open-ended, but, so World War II, just revolutionized the world from manufacturing to resources to the ability to transport stuff like this modern world's never seen. And what happened after the war, from what I understand, is we had all these, abilities to produce all this stuff. And to be fair, managing to grow your own nitrogen and all that kind of stuff, it can be done, although it creates more effort, more work, right? And just to buy nitrogen or to buy potash became easy, right? And so, what happened was as the older generation of that time period phased out, and then the next one came in, I'm not faulting them, but they hit the easy button, right? And to be fair, they kind of, let them into it and said, oh, this is cheap, right? Because at the time it was very cheap. And so with it being cheap and easy, it was like, oh, why not? I mean, the crops, grew really well on it, et cetera. And at that time there was, probably more carbon reserves than we perhaps have now. And so for the last, what's that been, 80 plus years probably by now, 85, that's been kind of the global shift of the way we grow stuff. And all while you can grow lots of bins and bushels, right, bales, it's not always nutrient dense. And, the other thing is it always goes back to money. If it's making money in the entire system, everyone likes that, and rightfully so. Everyone's got to make a living. And, kind of what happened is instead of, exploring the more holistic way, we took the easier path to our industrialized nation/world of being able to manufacture and mine and transport this stuff. And if it, it quote unquote worked, and for the time being, I mean, that's just the path that the world took, And now we're understanding that, after 80 years of anhydrous and, all this 0060 and some of this other stuff, not that it's all bad. If it's used correctly in the rightful place, it still has value, but we just can't continue to, some of these soils have way less forgiveness than others, and we've nitrogened them so hard that, we've burned through the organic matter and the carbons, and we've, collapsed these profiles that we have, weeds that are very, robust. We have all kinds of weird diseases because, of some of these collapses. And all of this can be fixed with correct nutrition and just some basic, simple understanding of back to the basics of what makes soil tick. And it's really not hard once you understand it. And there is no such thing as a resistant weed. There is no such thing as a disease that can't be controlled, both whether it's in plants or animals, people for that matter. But when you understand nutrition, I mean, you can fix it all, from the ground up.
Yeah, no, I think that, from the ground up is kind of the theme of this podcast, is because everything really does start in the soil, like you say. Something that I always run into with farmers is around like that weeds on farm, and if they're always spraying them, and that almost inherently creates a cycle for them to continue to come back, or they're blowing in from the neighbours, failing to realise that the conditions that they've created on their farm have actually led to those weeds thriving. So how do you manage that? I guess that conversation, because as you said, you can fix it through proper nutrition.
So there's also a book. I don't know if Acres USA has this one or not, but it's called When Weeds Talk by Jay McCaman. Have you ever read that one? So if you look at that
I've got
book,
it on my desk.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting that, and this ain't exact numbers, but I've studied it at great length. But so 90+% of all the undesirable broadleaf weeds are grown because of lack of available calcium and or phosphorus. And 90% of all weeds are grown because of excessive mag and excessive potassium. Okay. If you go all the way over to the salt column, just for the salt argument, there's about 10% or less weeds that grow because of excessive salt. So salt's never been the problem at growing weeds. It's the low available calcium, the low available phosphorus is why we have weeds with the excess mag and potassium that's in the soil. Typically, not every, I mean, that's why they grow. I'm saying not every soil's like that, but a lot of soils are because of the way we farm. Because every pound of commercial nitrogen you apply, you displace 3 pounds of calcium. Okay. So if you do the math, that's a lot in a year. Then on top of that, calcium's heavy. It sinks down through the strata. So let's just pick on nitrogen, commercial nitrogen, just for a second. We apply 200 pounds of commercial nitrogen, your choice, okay? That's 600 pounds of actual calcium that's gone, okay? Not to mention that when you apply more than 10 pounds of nitrogen per CEC in an application, you now burnt the carbon, okay? You burnt through organic matter as well. So if you do the math on this, okay, it gets pretty simple pretty quick. So now I displaced 600 pounds of calcium, and I burnt through some of my carbon. Remember what I said, calcium sinks and carbon pushes up. Well, guess where all my calcium is now? It's way out of the root zone. There's no carbon, there's not enough carbon to push it up. And I burnt that much calcium, plus what was left sunk. And so now it's no wonder that the weeds are growing prolifically, right? And then, oh yeah, by the way, Mr. Agronomist comes by, not picking on him, but he says you need all this potassium because the calcium is non-existent. And remember this transmutation thing. So the crop very unfortunately is substituting instead of calcium for potassium. And now we have a very disease-laden crop on top of it all that's growing up there. And the weeds are like, we think they're super weeds that can't be killed, which is not true. And it's all because we are not understanding how the system works. And so when you understand how the system works, it now gets, here again, it gets very fun, very easy again. Because see, the natural nitrogen cycle works off of calcium in the upper strata, in the upper 6 inches. That's why I like to apply a little, like, very often. Like we have this aragonite product that we're getting out of the Bahamas. I'm really excited about that one. That I've worked with that for over 20 years. It's a super product, just like C90. Very pure calcium carbonate. I'm trying to get guys to do about a 1 to 200 pound application a year on that one, just for this very conversation. So what happens is your on the natural nitrogen cycle, your C90 salt is feeding your azotobacter bacteria strains that are in every acre of land. And there's several others, but that's one of them that sticks out to me. When your calcium is in your upper strata, your soil's breathing. Before every storm system, we get low barometric pressure. Sinks into your aerobic zone. The rain momentarily seals it off. Those nitrogen processing bacteria that all your ocean minerals fed now feed your grass. That's how it worked before we showed up, okay? And remember, the saltier your soil is, without being excessive, is also an electrolyte, so you have to rely on less than half the amount of nitrogen, okay? Because what is an electrolyte? An electrolyte is what is it's a truck driver that's hauling the load of nutrients up and down in the plant, okay? So now you're not relying on one trucker, you got two. So you can really get, twice as much done with nitrogen and salt. That's true in a rumen, that's true in the soil. So that's why you need more salt and less nitrogen in both places, and you become way more efficient. Being temperate in all things, right? So, and that's how that works. And when you start understanding that, now as you mobilize more calcium back into the soil, now there's a high chance that you don't have to buy any potassium. So now we're processing 40, 80, 100 plus pounds of nitrogen out of the air. Okay. We got our calcium available. So now we're not going to buy no potassium. And the ocean minerals, we're bringing all of our trace elements, our borons, our zincs, our mollies are some of the big ones over here that guys get concerned about. So we got that box checked. And as far as phosphorus goes, our ocean minerals, calciums, and the C90 are great at feeding mycorrhiza. Phosphate is by and large a catalyst, which means it recycles. It's like a wrench in a toolbox. We use it to tighten the bolt or nut, and we put it back in and use it again. And so it really fuels that, which makes the phosphates move, which makes now our ability to grow, here again, whatever crop we're growing, with very, very, very little purchased, if any, phosphate in some scenarios. So you quickly see how efficient we just became. And if that don't put a smile on my face, I just walk away and say, I'm sorry, I can't help you.
It's pretty incredible.
It does. It does take management. It does take time. And one thing not to forget is sulfur, not to let sulfur out, because sulfur is very critical, because the soil is a gigantic battery. And you need sulfur there because the salt is creating the electricity. Sulfur has to store it. So you have to have sulfur in your soil. That would be the fifth one. It's very, very critical to make this system function very, very well.
So obviously, as you said, it can take a little bit of time to transition. If we're starting in a place where we are quite high users of nitrogen or potassium, bringing that into our system. Is there kind of a way, do you just wean, say, 25% off, or can you, largely drop out quite a bit out if you are starting in a good place with calcium?
So depending on, your past management, how much, just herbicides and commercial fertilizer, I tell guys, you should give yourself a minimum of a 3-year transition, because just like when we change feed on the cow, it takes her several weeks to, for that rumen biology to transition. Well, soil's moving way slower than a cow. And so it takes a full 3 years when you start making big, big changes to see the fullest effects. And that's if you're really managing intensely, right? So to be fair, you're going to have to dial back incrementally and let soil kind of, acclimate to what you're doing. The more rainfall that you have, probably the faster you can move. The drier the climate, you're going to have patience and perseverance. Also, I'm a huge fan of to expedite. Sometimes correct tillage has to be used. And that can be, there is places in this world that can be moldboarded, which I know is extreme and it flips a lot of people out. Other places can be vertical tilled and it works. Other places need something like an airway type of machine, or like a lawn aerator, if you will, that can poke kind of holes down in the ground, but yet, basically zero erosion, because I know some places blow and you gotta be super, super careful. But, the drier it is, and if you're trying to expedite things, picking proper things to help incorporate and aerate can really expedite what we're doing in some cases. Not that no-till can't work. If you're going to be a committed no-tiller, you got to really understand the biodiversity of plants and plant families so that it can move nutrients up and down, through, needs and even dead root holes, in the future. Then the other thing is for the, to be safe, whenever we're in production ag, there's obviously the numbers are big. There's a lot at risk. We encourage guys, if you really want to push the limits, take what we call a safe to learn area. For every farm, that's going to be different. It could be 5 acres, it could be 50, it could be 500, depends on your operation. And go do an extreme test of push the narrative as hard as you can push it on what we've discussed and see where the breaking point is for your operation. And then, sit down, we're going to have to analyze it and say, okay, what am I still lacking to hit this goal? And I'm not fully against, I still have some guys that we still use some commercial fertilizer in, and I'm okay with that, we don't have to be solely, with or without it. But, if it fits in and we need it, we'll use it. If not, then we let the tool in the toolbox till we do need it.
I love that ethos there. I'm very much the same as I feel like in agriculture, everyone gets I'm fully organic or I'm no-till, and they stick to those principles and they don't allow themselves to utilize tools that might actually set them up if they use them once to go forward, or like a little bit of nitrogen in a buffer season, not every year, but might actually kickstart your grass growth and get things going. So I love that you've kind of brought that ethos to what you do as well. We've talked about this product C90 a few times, so I think it's probably good to actually just explain what it is, because I'm excited that it's now coming to New Zealand to do some trial plots as well myself to see how it works in our context. You've been working with it for a number of years. Can you give us a bit of an explanation on what it is?
Yeah, so the C90 is actually harvested in the Sea of Cortez, which is on the North American continent on the west side there, Baja, Mexico area, south of California in the U.S. So what they do, it's a very hot, dry region. The Colorado River in the old days used to flow out there. However, there's no flowing river into that sea anymore, because it's all harvested water for, the people or the farms upstream. And so aside from that, so there's no pollution of any type flowing into it. Aside from that, it's I guess what they call the aquarium of the world. It's very just rich with sea life and whales, and I guess it's part of the Ring of Fire, so there's vents there for magma and volcanic coming out. So it's extremely mineral rich water. And so what they've done is they've taken, I guess, these big ponds and just let this ocean water flood inland and solar dehydrate it, and then after so many cycles, they went and harvest up the mineral salts and process it down to, whatever we need for cattle or people or even, the land. And so what makes it unique is it's not salt, it's a mineral salt, okay? Emphasis on the mineral salt. It's only about 75% sodium chloride, so the other 25% is a full mineral matrix. So just like every cattleman knows this, you feed salt and mineral, this has kind of a mineral salt, it's all in one package, right? And so whether you're eating it, feeding it to cows, or spreading it on land, is you're spreading a true mineral salt out there, and that is what's making it work. That's what's making it successful. And the neat part about it is when you spread it on land, I have seen it in a few instances, in certain cases, I've seen it recharge, calcium, phosphorus, potassium, trace elements, and we didn't even buy any. So, and build organic matter. So, I mean, it's a really neat thing. I guess it's a testament to the power of its ability to sequester CO2 out of the air.
No, it is. It's fascinating how complete of a product it seems to be. When we use, you've done quite a lot of work in dairy, so I kind of want to just dive into that a little bit and how you can utilise it in that. I think in the past, in terms of something that I see here in New Zealand, is we got quite high milk ureas because we've got really high protein grasses. So can you use it as a feed supplement as well as in the soil as well to try and kind of buffer that?
Yes. So yeah, definitely you can use it on the grass for fertilizer as well as in the cow diet. So on that grass thing, so basically, so if it's a commercial nitrogen-induced protein, that's going to be a very soluble or watery protein, which is going to drive it right into the cow's milk. However, if that protein is grown more naturally, the way we were describing on the calcium sea salt side of the natural cycle, that protein in that grass will be very what they call structured or bypass or amino acid form of protein, and it will not create the same issues in the cow, the rumen, the udder, et cetera, repro, et cetera, the same. And the other thing is the more energy or sugars that we can put in there, that is your energy is how you offset excessive protein in a cow's rumen.
Yeah. So I guess the great thing about dairy is that you kind of get that report card every day, the milk in the vat sent off and you get the test back. If you wanted to just kind of explore whether that you need this in your system, would it be a good way to be to actually feed some to the cows if you've got an in-shed feeding system just to see how they respond?
Yeah. So for instance, when we started feeding C90, and this was really big, but like I said, we had some imbalances and some nutrient cravings. But when we started feeding C90 to our dairy herd, it increased us by 5 pounds of milk per head per day, which that's an enormous number. I'm just going to be honest. Okay. I don't expect many guys to see that. Okay. However, and for the reason it did that for us is we didn't have enough available calcium and we were way high in potassium because I was listening to all the people that was all about potassium, and we limed only because we had to, if we had to. And so that being said put it out there, free choice, put it as part of the ration if you're making a TMR or not. But if you're not, then put it as free choice. If they need it, they'll take it. If not, they won't. And, the more that you put out there in the grass, the more balanced the grass will become. The wetter the environment, it's going to wash it down through, quicker. It's just how nature is. And the drier the climate is, the more it'll stay around longer just because that's how nature is again. And, the wetter it is, the more you'll have to apply more often. The drier it is, you can get by with less applications and have more net residual is what will happen.
So I guess the context that I work in, I've got a lot of irrigated farms, like pivot irrigated, but also there's some farms that are on the western coast that get, 4 meters of rain a year sort of thing. So how would you manage in those contexts utilizing something like this because it's actually going to be quite wet?
So what I would do, and forgive me because my brain always goes back to the English units. But so 100 pound to the acre is kind of a standby for what we're doing. However, in a grazing pasture, if you're grazing very intently and you have very high rainfall, you could push it up in there to the 400 pound the acre range and be very successful. And here again, just let your conscience be your guide. You'd have to do some testing just to see where the ROI points are, where the breaking points are, but either financially or, where I put an extra 100 pounds on to get no more grass type of deal. As far as hurting the grass, you'd have to put 10 tons down before you hurt the grass in that wet of an environment. So we're not even close to hurting the grass on that side of things. So
that's good. That's good to know. And are you typically seeing when you are applying that following season, there is like quite a bit of additional grass growth because you're kind of balancing that mineral flow?
Yeah. So typically you'll see, in your drier periods, your grass will hang on longer before it, goes into that drought dormancy type of deal. The other thing is the more mineral dense your grass gets, And when you're grazing, this would be a little bit more harder to quantify than if you were, feeding a TMR and you weighing everything in and out. But as that grass increases in its mineral density, a couple things will happen is its moisture will be closer to 75 to 85% standing instead of 80, 85 to 90% water standing. So what happens is the cow's getting a greater mineral density, so she's going to eat less. So even if it's the same amount of grass, less becomes more, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's better conversion, feed conversion efficiency, really.
Yeah, and that's a big thing because you're feeding a lot of cows, and it takes a lot of feed to feed cows. If you can get a 5, 8, 10, 20% increase in efficiency, that's huge. Those are big numbers.
Yeah, but that really does flow through to the profitability of that farm system. But you're also talking about resilience as well by actually holding on longer when things do get dry.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So, yeah, because it's helping to manage the water that is there, better and just the carbons and all that. So
yeah, absolutely. So when we are talking about, I heard you speak about this on a webinar, which was fantastic. It's about this biological sequence of nutrient uptake for plants. Can you give us kind of like a high level of what that is? Because I think it's really quite important to understand all these little key pieces that people forget about.
Yeah. So I don't want to reach from a memory here, but kind of like if you stack up dominoes, if you will, right? So, and I'm sure it's way more complex than this, but we'll give it a high level. So boron's kind of the first one that has to be there to that trigger. It's kind of the match that lights the fire. Okay. Yep. That's going to, let me just get my deal here, make sure I don't mess up for you here. It means we're talking to a lot of people. But so boron is going to be your activator of silicon. Silicon is very abundant in the soil, typically. That is what that defies gravity and creates the upward flow of nutrients into a plant. That then is going to trigger and start mobilizing calcium, okay? And that's now, nitrogen is going to be your electrolyte, okay? That's going to make calcium, move and do its thing. Then we're going to hit magnesium, which that's what turns a plant green. Magnesium is what is one of many things that harvest the sunlight's energy, okay? And now we're going to transfer all that together, and it's going to now finally move phosphate, okay? And remember, anytime we start moving phosphate, that's where sugars, which is carbon, comes from, okay? And remember we said every nutrient enters in the phosphate form when everything's running correctly. So now we got carbon. In this case, liquid carbon because it's plant sugars, right? And so now that's running. And then potassium is the last thing that needs to be available or made available. It is important, however, not excessively. And potassium, helps with some plant structure. It does help with some water management, things like that. And so, that's the simple flyover of, your biochemical sequence of nutrient release. And like I said, and boron is very abundant in ocean minerals. So, C90, stuff like aragonite, your kelps, your fishes, boron, the ocean is actually the best source of boron in the world. And here again, the reason our boron... Go ahead.
I was just going to say that's good to know because it can be an expensive trace element to add to things.
It's very expensive. And the reason is do you know why we're deficient in boron, or supposedly deficient? It's because of all of our excessive nitrogen application. We wash it down through. It's down there, but it's down there deep. And so that's the other thing, your kelps, your fishes, your C90s, your aragonites. If you could ever get rid of commercial nitrogen, you will eventually rebuild your boron in your upper stratus. I've seen it done. It's hard, but I have seen it done.
Yeah. You've mentioned the aragonite a couple of times. Can you explain more about what that is?
So aragonite is over at the Bahamas, which is on the other side of the North American continent, down in the Caribbean. So down there, and this is really neat. So the water, they say, is just a little bit higher in magnesium, a little bit saltier than normal. Not by much, but just a touch. And then they say there's I'm going to get this, I always butcher this word, but there's some type of cyanobacteria bacteria in there somewhere. Mm-hmm. And anyhow, all this comes together in that part of the ocean for whatever reason, and it starts pulling CO2 out of the air. And as it sequesters that carbon into the water, this calcium, very pure calcium carbonate rains down in the water, and that shallow water, and creates aragonite, which is pure calcium carbonate. And so here again, it's, I guess, one of nature's way to balance carbon in the atmosphere, because the only thing I know, and it stores it is calcium carbonate. And so has 4 times the surface area as limestone. about that much more energy than limestone. It has a whole bunch of trace minerals with it as well, similar to C90. It's let me see what else. Just very bioavailable. It's I call it living calcium. The people say it's not technically living, but it's like right there. But it harmonizes very well in a cow's diet. You can feed it to a cow. You can spread it as calcium needed in the soil, and it performs extremely well.
No, that's cool. That's a very interesting product. Do you do alongside kind of these ocean minerals, do you do a lot with biological products at all as well? And what's been your experience in there and utilizing those?
Yeah, so I guess to be fair, I guess now that you mentioned that, so in my early years of being very young as a dairyman, I guess I understood that there was life in the soil, which I guess led me to soil biology. And so my very first biological product I stumbled across was called Pro Soil Ag Solutions, built here in Hawkins, Texas. And so that was back in the days where, hardly anybody had one, and the guys that did have one, they all made fun of them with snake oil, right? But now everybody has biological. So this is what I've learned about biologicals in the last 30 years. So an enzyme-based biological is really the core. And to be fair, there's only about 10, maybe 25% of the biologicals on the market are even worth your money. Most of them are just taking your. So if you're going to mess with a biological or biostimulant, it should be a dormant product. It should be enzyme-based, or some people call it spore-based. Like C90 has one, they call theirs spore-based, which the only difference is it just depends when you shut down the culturing process is the only difference, from my understanding. So that being said, what makes them the best and the most unique is the soil. I break the soil down into two very simple parts: bacteria and fungi. Bacteria largely manages your nitrogen. Your fungi largely manages your phosphate. And if you've been paying attention, everything enters into phosphate form. The bacteria manages the nitrogen. We got it all, right? And so an enzyme or spore-based product will feed the entire microbiome, the native microbiome. And you always want to feed the natives because that's what the good Lord put in that corner, right? And then calcium, salt is going to be the things that make them multiply. Okay. Without calcium, without the mineral salt, even it won't work, right? And so if you're going to use a biostimulant, that's the ones you want to use. Now, to all the cattlemen out there, okay, as a cheat sheet, if they're grazing, that's God's biostimulant with their saliva and their, urine and fresh manure. That is God's biostimulant from a bovine. So technically, if you're grazing correctly, and I'm going to say this, off the record, I probably wouldn't put my money in a biostimulant much in a pasture unless you have big, big problems. In a pasture, you need to be fixing your minerals and your ratios, and nature will balance itself. Now, where we're using herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, you definitely better be using a biostimulant because, you need to put something back because you took away. Now, if you're a pasture guy that's using, some type of herbicide or something out there, then yes, you also need a biostimulant. So that's kind of how I advise my crew.
No, that's really fascinating. I think it's actually quite valuable, and having 30 years of experience is pretty good to work with. I think the thing is people was fearful of, they've been burnt by a snake oil one in the past that hasn't worked. So they're always fearful of using biologicals unless they have been kind of recommended by another farmer that it does work. So yeah, that's just something I wanted to cover off. So if someone's wanting to start looking into utilising ocean minerals going forward, what would you recommend kind of their first place to start with?
So the first thing I'd say on ocean minerals is the first rule is do not take the salt out. That's the magic that makes it work. Flat out, guys. I know I get shot at all the time, but I'm telling you, minerals without salt is go talk to the cow. She'll tell you all day long how important the salt is for the minerals. Okay.
Yeah.
So that being said, if you're going to do ocean minerals, keep the salt in there. Okay. Understand that salt's your friend. Understand how to manage it and be temperate with it. Okay. Aside from that, there's several. C90 is a great product, great company to work with. However, they're not the only ones out here, I'm sure. There's obviously other ones out here, which is good. But, just kind of know the difference. The other thing is on dry salts, okay, is understand that, when they talk about percentage, think of 100% as a pie, okay? So if something's 75%, in this case, sodium chloride, that means the other 25% is minerals, okay? If we take, say, XYZ company's product, let's just say it's 95% sodium chloride. Well, there's only 5% available for minerals. So, I mean, make sure that if you're using that product, that you're, only paying accordingly. It should be a fifth of the cost theoretically, because you're only getting a fifth of the minerals. You see what I'm saying? So, I mean, just
Absolutely.
as a farmer, be informed of how things work. C90 is a fantastic product. I love it to death. I mean, but there is other products out there that I've seen work, to be fair, and, to be transparent. And so, and I realize that at the end of the day, that every operator, has to do what's right for him. I mean, you got to have positive cash balance at the end if we're going to do this again next year. So, and I completely get that and respect that, and that's always at the first and foremost of my, when I'm helping someone is, we got to make sure that they're positive cash flow,
No,
that's very, very
absolutely.
important.
I think that's the main thing. We can do all this stuff without focusing on actually profitability. And if we don't have a profitable business, then we can't continue to improve the environment that we're working with in the ecosystem and have healthy animals and serve our community.
Right. We have no business, nor can we have any fun anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the main thing. We're here for a short time. We might as well have some fun while we're at it.
That's
So
right.
then I finish up all my podcast with a final question, which is, what's one belief or principle that's kept you grounded, no matter kind of what season of life you're in?
Well, so for me, I mean, I guess the most important thing in my life is, I accepted Jesus Christ as my personal savior. I mean, that's my kind of my grounding and hinge point. I'd say the second thing is probably, the people around you, be it that family. I mean, realize that this is about the people. If you can, help your fellow man, ladies included. I mean, we're all an encouragement or a discouragement to someone, right? So we should try to be encouraging and back to that profitable thing. I mean, we're all affecting someone, right? And and then I would say this for the families on farms that are working together. I mean, coming from a family farm, there is always challenging dynamics of, cousins, brothers, uncles, dads, grandpas. I mean, I would say this is, do your best to sit down and have an open dialogue of communication to figure out a path forward, even if there has to be some compromise on both sides, because there's not many of us left out here. And I speak of that globally. I mean, in America, we're down to 23,000 working, operating commercial dairy farms. That's not many, and so my encouragement is, yes, it can be stressful. Yes, there's a lot of things moving in this modern world, but, realize that, that person, that circle that God surrounded you with, he put it there for a reason, and make the best of the good and make the best and learn from the bad and try to be better with it, And I would have to say everything I've learned is came from challenging times, because you have a choice to make. You're either going to be better for it or could be for bitter for it. I don't ever want to be that way. I want to always be better. So
I love it. That's a great way to finish. So, Lynn, if they want to, someone who's listening to this wants to connect with you or learn more about what you do, what's the best place to go and find you?
probably, to be fair, I'm not the best technical guy. I do have a website. However, if you contact me in that, I may be really behind to getting to you. So really, either by email or, phone call or text is the fastest way to get hold of me. And I do have WhatsApp too for, that seems like that works better around the world on the phone. But I mean, my phone number is 717-580-1458. Like I said, that works on WhatsApp. And then my email is lynn.h@oceanblueagronomics.com. And my name's LYNN. So, but that's probably the three best ways to get a hold of me. So, but
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time today, Lynn. It's been a fantastic chat. I've learned a lot and answered a lot of my questions as well. I really appreciate you giving your time today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to be on here. Thank you.